WestWords interview. Today I'm talking to Zoe Ghani. Zoe is a Western Sydney resident and was originally from Western Sydney, I suppose. Were you born out this way, Zoe?
I was born very far away in Afghanistan, actually.
Afghanistan, right, that is a long way away. When did you come to Australia?
So I was born there, left about when I was 4 or 5, and then we were refugees at the time. We were fleeing from the Soviet occupation. Went and lived in New Delhi for about 4 or 5 years and came here when I was about 9 or 10, and we lived in Sydney ever since.
Right, so you've been involved with WestWords a little bit. Writing isn't your first job. You work in technology, don't you? Is it in IT or that sort of?
Yeah, I do. Yes, I work as a chief technology officer at the Iconic, which is an e-commerce fashion and sportswear brand, and I run all of technology there. And yes, that's kind of my profession in the day-to-day.
All right. So you applied to WestWords for one of our Varuna residencies up at the house in Katoomba, which if anyone doesn't know about Varuna, go and look it up. It's an amazing place. And you spent some time up there with some other people that have been selected by WestWords working on your first novel, which was called Pomegranate and Fig. Have I got that right?
You have, yes.
Yeah.
It was
and so
you
were up there with Luke Carmen, weren't you? He was your mentor?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to talk about that whole process a little bit, but really what we wanted to talk to you about today is your journey from, I suppose, in a couple of ways, your journey from being somebody who came to Australia as a refugee, which isn't a unique story. It's not unique in the sense that there are a lot of refugees coming to this country. I mean, Australia is Western Sydney, as we've said many times, 170 different countries represented, over 100 languages. So in that regard, it's not unique, but it's also unique in the fact that everybody's story is unique. But I kind of want to go back and look at, the way you came to being a writer from your family background and your experience, and also how you came to be a writer from an area that really isn't generally considered to be one of the more creative kind of fields, if you like. It may be, but it's not the way it's perceived. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you came from where you started to where you are right now.
Sure. So look, I have always wanted to be a writer ever since I was a kid. And I actually, the first time I ever wrote something that I remember very clearly was I wrote my biography at the age of about 10. And it was with a pencil and a diary with a lock, which I submitted to a competition for writing for kids. As like my novel entry. It was my first ever novel fictionalized life story. Of course, I never got the diary back, which I'm sad about. But Sydney Morning Herald used to have this section, Super Scene, where young people could send their writing through and you could win little awards here and there. I used to win things here and there and used to give me a bit of a buzz. So writing's been kind of in my blood since the beginning. I suspect some of the creative things that myself and my family have actually come from my grandfather, who was a very prominent artist in Afghanistan. He wrote poetry, did miniature art, sculpture, and Ustad Mashal's still known over there for his legacy. So I think I've got a bit of a strain from him on the creative side. And ever since then, I've always written on the side, but I learned that you need to have a love and then you need to have a job, because I had learned very quickly that it was quite hard to break into the market as a writer, as someone that could live on writing. So in university, I continued creative writing, but alongside that, I also studied journalism, thinking maybe that's how I would kind of do my day-to-day. However, then the internet came along and I fell in love with the internet, because I was writing articles and it was going into print. And if I had a better idea, I couldn't change it. And, you know, with poetry and prose, you're kind of constantly, you could tinker for a while until you're never really happy, right? So putting something on the web, I realized I could do that. And that was kind of part of the seduction and my entry into technology. And I've had to learn a lot within the tech space to get to where I am. And look, you talk about technology and creativity. It's actually a bit of an overlap, because in the job that I do in tech, even though it's kind of got tech in it as the title, it's really about people and the experiences that we create for people, and that's where a lot of the creativity comes in. In fact, engineering itself is quite creative as well. Not that I was in engineering, but I've led engineering teams, and I can see this overlap between the writing mind of wanting to explore opportunities and imagine worlds, and creativity in technology. And I think that's where the overlap is for me.
Yeah, I suppose that the one of the most simple machines that mankind has ever created, the lever or the wheel for that matter, came about because somebody went, there's got to be a better way to do this thing we're trying to do, right? There's got to be some sort of creative spark in there. I guess that's at the basis of science generally, isn't it? This exploring of what's next.
Absolutely. And I think when I love that saying around necessity is the mother of invention, but the other one of my favorites, which I heard at a conference once, is creativity loves constraint. So it's sometimes quite simple to just say, I'm going to create, and there is a blank canvas. But I also think it's also, I guess, a good creative challenge to have constraint. And that's both happens in writing and in technology, which is kind of another great overlap between the two worlds.
Yeah, it's funny that I'd never heard it put that way. Creativity loves constraint, but I know it to be true. I mean, some of the best art comes from being limited in what you can do. You can't show everything, and in fact, writing is better when you don't show everything, isn't it? You show a bit of constraint, a bit of restraint. Um, so tell us a little bit about your the book itself. Now, it's not published yet, and I was going to ask you where you're up to with that, because it was shortlisted for a fairly major award, wasn't it? Which was sort of, tell us about the Rochelle Prize.
Sure. So yes, it was shortlisted for the Rochelle Prize. I completed the novel, and the manuscript is now with Hachette for consideration. Obviously, I can imagine with COVID-19, things are going to be a little bit up in the air for everybody. So I'm kind of taking that, just I guess waiting to hear back. They have been in touch to say, hey, we are considering it, but it is a little bit of a challenging time for them. They're not making decisions at the same pace. So it's with them. My fingers and toes are crossed that they like it enough and accept it. The story is kind of using many stories that I've heard growing up, and it's telling the story of a couple in Afghanistan in the 70s before the war came in. And they are in an arranged marriage. They fall in love. They start to dream dreams that any couple would. They start a family, and then the war comes. And it's really an exploration of what happens to a family, and especially a couple and their love, when they go through such an experience. And it's really trying to show more the non-visible scars and impacts on human beings who go through this kind of experience, because we can see physical scars and we can see numbers, but it's just adding to the already existing voices that talk about the emotional, psychological, and identity impact of war, and how this couple and their selves and their identities, and how they identify themselves and what they believe are their superpowers and weaknesses evolve as a result of that experience, and who do they become today.
Did if I can ask, and I hope this isn't sort of too personal, are your parents still alive?
Sure, yeah. So my mum is, about 4 years ago, my father passed away.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But I think one of the things that really helped with the story was he was kind of my first starting point in understanding the world of the 70s in Afghanistan. And I was luckily able to get lots of stories from him and recorded a lot of those kind of experiential parts of it, which helped to inspire things in the novel as well.
What do you think are the commonalities between the experience of someone like your parents leaving Afghanistan in the 70s and people coming from that part of the world now? What are the commonalities and what are the differences, do you think?
Look, I think there's a commonality in all human beings when there is the refugee point. So there's a migration, relocation thing, and there is a refugee and war thing. And I think no matter what the country, nation is, there is a commonality between the two, and then there is some differences between the two. So for example, in the refugee story, when I've met people who have come from other countries where they have become refugees and therefore had to move, the commonalities are the triggering of an instinct that says, I love my home, but I cannot live here anymore. That is a forced escape rather than I think I would like to explore living in London and I would just go and relocate. That in itself creates a different set of decision-making processes in one's mind, because it's about a survival instinct rather than an enhancement of one's life from what it is. And ultimately it is an enhancement because you're going from a lack of safety to another more safe environment, but it's really on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's really kind of like the basics of that safety and security that one is seeking. And that's what I think is common in all refugee experiences, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I've spent some time with people from South Africa who have made the decision to leave South Africa, but they can't bring everyone in their family, and so they leave grandma and grandpa back in Johannesburg, and they come here. And I sort of think about that, but part of me goes, well, they can still visit from time to time and so forth. But what you're describing is sort of it's a little bit more like I think about the early colonial days of Australia, the British colonial days, where when someone got on a ship and left London to come, or Southampton to come to Australia, that was it. They were never going back. They were never seeing that. They knew they were never seeing that country again. They were never seeing the people on the deck, on the dock again. Is that? Do you think that's something that kind of was in your parents' mind when they left? Were they hopeful that they would be able to return, or were they going, much as we love this, we have to leave this now because that part of who we are is gone now?
Yeah, look, I have seen its evolution in them. So I was India was the first escape. It was close enough. You could smuggle letters in and out. The letters would be censored between the family. And the conversations at home were, when the war is over, we will go back and do this. Our India stay was super temporary. 1 year, we didn't even go to school. We were just like, this is going to be. And then it was the Australia stage. It was much further, letters hardly coming through. And it started to dawn on them. And our family conversations were like, okay, so this could be a while. And eventually to now, where it's what happened. Like if you speak to my parents and my father when he was alive, they're trying to process what happened. They're like, how did this happen? Now I'm 80 years old, and actually all those times that they used to think, when the war is over, the one war has become another and another and another. So it's kind of like, I think my parents need time to process what happened to then be able to talk about it in a different way. Does that make sense? Like sometimes we go through something and we cannot reflect about it because essentially, even though that thing is over, we're still in it in our mind.
So tell us a little more about the story of the book, because you've said that it sort of harkens back to the 70s and your parents, but tell us a little bit more detail about what the book is about, if you like. What's your elevator pitch? If I ask you for the elevator pitch of your book, what would it be?
Yeah, so I think it would be saying it's a story of a couple who fall in love, who start to build a life, and that life is destroyed by war, and nothing they expected ends up to be what they had dreamt together, and that's what's really about. And it's two characters. He is Rahim is the male character. He's a very I guess extremely successful public prosecutor, has worked really hard to get himself where he is, very educated family, has delayed getting married, is kind of introduced to Henna, who is just pretty much finishing university and college, and he basically chose the tradition of going to ask for her hand. They go multiple times. The family keeps saying no because her father is an enlightened individual who wants his daughter to get an education. And if she doesn't approve, he doesn't want to force her. But at the end of the day, the social constructs around two people getting together, I guess the status of these two very powerful and prominent families gets in the way of the father being able to do the right thing and says, look, we have a lot to lose if you say no. I've known his father for so long. Our families have this connection. It's going to really offend, and culturally that is completely inappropriate. And she reluctantly agrees, and they have a very awkward engagement and a wedding. And then obviously the first child comes, and then the other child comes, but is a stillborn, and then they kind of flee. And there's a lot of what I was trying to talk about wasn't just, I was trying to be able to create a world, because that world is not the one that a reader would know. So I had to put a bit more detail into the culture that they live in to try to help people understand why they would prioritize the things that they prioritize and make the decisions that they make.
Yeah, I was talking to Melina Maketa just 2 days ago for one of our mini masterclasses. We were talking about writing from a point of view of identity, and she was talking about this, how there are the commonalities that all people have, but then there are the cultural specifics that kind of seated in a particular way. What I want to talk about in a little while is the process through mentorship and so forth, because your mentor when you won one of the WestWords fellowships was Alison Fraser, who's an editor, and a lot of people go with a writer who writes in a similar kind of field and so forth. So we'll come back to how and why that decision was made and what the pros and cons might have been of that. But let's go right back to the growth trajectory of this idea. What was the nub of the idea, the germ of the idea? Was there a moment when you went, that could be something I could explore, or was it a bigger kind of thing? And what's your process in taking something from a little idea through to a completed novel?
So the process is completely different to so I'm writing on something new now, and that process is completely different to the process of the manuscript we're talking about. The idea has always been, ever since that first diary that I mentioned, the scented diary with the lock, was to tell the story of what happened to us. As even a young child, I absorbed a lot of stuff and remember a lot of things that are surprising to others at that age. I was the eldest, so it was kind of like I was very involved with my parents and their experience. And so ever since I remember, I wanted to talk about the Afghan family that I was in. Somehow I wanted to tell a story, and I wanted people to know what it's like. I just had that was the idea. I have written this idea in, so many different ways. It has had, from that first diary, it's been probably like a very long prose piece. It's been a poetry and prose piece. It's been a memoir with recipes. And I was at the point of a completed memoir with recipes, but I was still thinking, this is cardboard. It just feels like cardboard. I don't like reading it. I don't like what it is. It's done. Couldn't bring myself to submit it to anywhere. Didn't tell anyone about it. Just felt wrong. I then took Year of the Novel, the course with Emily Maguire. And I took this idea or this piece, this script that I had to the course, and I decided that either I was going to fix this or if something else would happen, and I would be open to that. And the best thing about it was I was going into this world as a student who knows nothing. I was deleting everything I knew and I had learned at university about creative writing. I went in blank slate, a humble student, knows nothing, I'm wide open. What can I learn? Emily Maguire is one of the most phenomenal human beings I've ever met. She taught us how to not just construct a novel, but how to think of ourselves as writers and gave us permission to follow our heart when it comes to that creative pull. That was life-changing and significant.
That was something that I was actually going to ask you about, was this idea that, when you were talking about, I want to show what it was like, that kind of slightly didactic approach that I see all the time, especially from people who are writing for children and young adults. They go, I want to show children that this is possible. I want to show young adults that. And then it's interesting that you kind of started to talk about how Emily said, actually, I'm going to give you permission to, how did you put it? Give you permission to write from the heart.
Well,
and is that when
yes,
is that when it really sort of got exciting and
100%. Yeah, everything changed. It went from anything factual, anything memoir, anything technically true, to my imagination and my brain going, okay, now we got something. So a tiny element of the wanting to process what happened for myself fed into a lot of research and characters and people that have nothing to do with it. And that's when I felt free. And when I wrote my first few pieces, and it was basically reading it, I was like, oh, that's the voice I always had. Oh, they can do this. It was just a flood. And during that time, as I was submitting pieces for feedback from others, I learned so much. And she said, look, I think you should consider entering Rochelle and a few prizes just to get yourself a bit out there and exposed. And that really built confidence and really changed things for the work. And it became what it is now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a question at this point. I just want to basically agree with you and again say that if anyone's watching this and going, what's my best approach into writing something that's going to engage, let go of this idea that you want to teach the readers something and take them on a journey that they want to follow, because as humans, I think we just love to watch other people's stories, don't we? It's sort of a universal kind of thing. So
and actually, I love that what you said, because it's what I had to decide, which I'm so pleased that I got there, is I just had to decide that I was going to allow myself to just tell a story that I'm enjoying. And that was the pivotal thing about it.
Did your family struggle with this? Because I know that in my own experience, sometimes in my early days, my first couple of books, my family members would read something I'd written and go, is that really what you think of me? And you go, no, it's not about you anymore. Is that something that, did you have funny sort of navigations amongst your family in how you were telling what they probably felt was their story?
Look, most of them read the previous memoir version with the recipes, which painstakingly my mum and dad helped me to translate from Afghan household recipes. So they were part of it. And they've read pieces from this and they aren't actually seeing it in the same way. So I haven't had any tricky moments yet, but I suspect there will be some.
Oh, probably. But, it's just a story, Mum. It's just a story.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. So you went to the Rochelle and you were shortlisted for that. How much did you send to them? Was it the whole manuscript or is it a partial manuscript?
It was a partial. It was, I think, the first 3 or 4 chapters only, and plus the synopsis. And then they wanted like a map of how you think the story is going to go the whole way through. So I did a mud map and a structure that I thought I was going to end up with, but of course that's not how it works.
Are you a planner or a pantser?
I'm a both.
You're both.
So I'll make a skeleton of how I think it should go, and then I'll completely break it when I'm actually in the moment, because scenes have baby scenes that I wasn't expecting, and then suddenly the character's different, and I just go with the flow after that.
Do you have any huge, and this might tie into what we're going to talk about in a second, but do you have any huge moments where you went, oh my, I mean, apart from that first one where you went to learn from Emily, but did you have any moments where you just went, holy crap, I've just written this entire book from the wrong person's point of view? Or
oh yes, I had too many characters.
Right, that's a common.
And then I realized, yeah. So I realized then, if they were consolidated, this would make this more important character more real. And then it started, because ultimately some of them were just dimensions of the one character. They were not really two characters. And so I started to consolidate big time. Yes, big time I had those moments.
It's a terrifying moment though, isn't it? Because you've just been sweating blood for months, and then you go, oh my God, it's all going to have to happen again. Yeah. We've all been there, Zoe. It's all right. So
I have actually written the whole thing in a different point of view, the whole thing. But I did that after submitting the manuscript to Hachette, as just to see what would happen.
Well, I think that's a great tip, isn't it, to people who are writing? Just if you're not quite sure, maybe try it from a different point of view, or a different voice, or a different present tense as opposed to past, whatever, and just see what shifts and what changes. I think it's very much an experimental process, wouldn't you think? So you went to Varuna, which, as I mentioned earlier, is in the beautiful Blue Mountains, a beautiful old house that was gifted by the Dark family at the end of when Dr. Dark died. His family very kindly passed it on for people like you and me to use. Zoe, how was your Varuna experience?
It was amazing. So I think it takes a village to make a manuscript, right? And the people that I spent time with there were part of that village that really helped me on my journey.
Who else was there with you at the time? Do you remember?
Sure. So there was a couple of guys who were poets. There was also Patrick, who is now in my writing group with me. We've kept in touch. Jason and Paula were both poets. Paula ended up publishing one of his poetry books that he was working on within the house as well. There was myself and there was Luke.
So, so Luke Carmen, who's a Western Sydney, a bit of a legend now in the Western Sydney writing world, amazing guy. What sort of advice was he giving you?
So he's amazing, because he's got this like way of so all the feedback processes I find are a bit like I've got a blunt pencil, and somebody comes along with a comment, an idea, or some feedback, and it sharpens the pencil, and I keep that change. So he really challenged me on, okay, how crisp can you make this description? How much more movement can this chapter have? And that was really helpful to kind of sharpen that pencil of a chapter or a scene. And what we used to do was we would have group sessions, and then we would have one-on-one consultations, and then I would take the feedback away and come back and go, am I close? And he'd be like, yes, okay, we try this other thing now. And he would just work very consultatively and very respectful of the work itself. And I found that both with I guess I've been lucky with anyone so far that I've worked with as a mentor. I just love the way that they have respected the creative seed that has sprouted on the page, even though it's not very elegant, but helped to sharpen that. And so that's kind of how it was to work with him. And very, 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 very inspiring guy.
Did it concern you at all, with being fairly fresh in the writing world? Did it concern you at all that the changes that were being suggested to you, that they might change the nature of your work and make it unrecognisable as your own?
I have thought about this because others have asked me, and I can only articulate this in hindsight. It's like, that moment where before I went to Emily's class, I had a chat to myself. I said, you have been talking about writing a story, this story in some way, for like since the beginning of remembering who you are. This year, you're going to go and be the humble student and get it done, or you're going to stop talking about it. I think that decision in hindsight made me fearless when it came to feedback, because I was so hungry. Like, look, my life is in technology. The people I talk to are in technology. Everything around me is a technology. I did not know one person who was writing anything. And suddenly I was in a class with 12 people with feedback. I wasn't going to say no to any of that. So from that foundation, and also the tools that Emily gave us around, is it true to hear? Now, I know one thing. I know that at the time that someone's giving me the feedback, I don't know if it's true to my heart or not. So what I do is I write that feedback and I live with it, for as long as I need to. And then I one day will decide whether I keep it or not. So some of Luke's stuff I didn't keep, some of Luke's stuff I kept. But in that moment, in that time, until some time had lapsed, where I went back as the reader self, I couldn't tell. And I've treated feedback like that ever since.
I know that myself and other people have found that early on in our careers, you take all the feedback that's offered to you, and this is all you've ever wanted to do for your whole life, and suddenly you're being offered feedback and you go, oh, I'd better do that. In my own paranoid kind of way, for me, it was a fear that if I didn't take the advice that was being offered to me by this very experienced editor, that my publisher was going to go, you know what, forget it, we're not, tear up the contract, which of course wasn't going to happen. I hope it wasn't going to happen, but at the same time it was like, oh, I don't know, so I didn't push back too hard. And in fact, for me, that was one of the things that my editor, because Gary Crew edited my first 2 books, and he actually assisted me with that. It's very meta. He actually said to me, last time I gave you advice and you just took it. Don't do that. Don't just take it on face value. So I think I think a good mentor will notice how you're taking their mentorship as well.
Yeah, and it was very much part of that foundational learning that I luckily got with Emily, because she was like, take the feedback, listen to it, check in. Is it true to you? If it's not, just put it aside. It doesn't matter. And that foundation really resonated, because my mindset was, I'm just here to learn, and that's kind of how the two fit together for me as well.
I think one of the great things about places like Varuna, apart from Sheila's food, which is astonishing, is this collegial kind of thing, bouncing ideas off each other. But when you applied for the WestWords fellowship, did you ask for an editor, or did we at WestWords suggest an editor? How did that work? Because it's not often that people get an editor as their mentor. What was the thinking behind that decision?
I know. And look, I owe this to Michael and the team big time. Like, they came back and said, hey, we think you need an editor. We don't think you need a writer. And I was like, whoa, I've never worked with an editor before. Bring it, And in hindsight, oh my God, I'm so grateful they made that decision, because I would have never I didn't know what editors can do, what the superpower is. And Alison,
tell us, what's the superpower of an editor then? Tell us. Look, the ones with the big E on their chest, what's their superpower?
Look, I never saw the structure in the way that she did. And how I was talking about my blunt pencil, everything she did was sharpening that, but she was also challenging me. She would come back and say, okay, here are 3 ways this situation which one resonates the most? And one of them I had thought of, but one of them I hadn't. Or 2 of them mushed together in a way that really triggered something for me and made my script better. But the key thing is that they see the technical progression of the story in a way that I would have never thought of. And she goes to the bone of it. She's like, okay, maps the arc, and I was like, oh, and she would say something like, you've got a pretty good arc here. I was like, I wasn't even thinking arc. I was just thinking language, the character, like the fun of creating this thing. And she saw the technical part, and being a tech person, that's really refreshing to have someone else look at something else technically. But she looked at the technology of it.
Because you tech people, you're all about architecture, aren't you? The architecture of a program, or the architecture of a system, or whatever. I mean, I'm not that techie, apart from the music stuff. So I kind of just freeform, and that's when I fall back on editors. And I think you're right. I mean, I know several editors who are very much of the this is how I think this should go, and some writers like that, but others like you, and I think I'm the same. We still like to maintain some kind of control over the story, in the sense that if they say, here are some options for how this could go, but keep in mind what the implication of this might be down the track. It still keeps the power with you as the creator, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I never felt through the process is that this story so long in different variations, and now I've discovered a way to tell it that I actually think was true to me. It wasn't ever going to get to that, like, yes ma'am, I'm just going to change it. It's always going to be that eventually I'm going to have to still love it. And for that, there has to be an authentic connection with it. So with Alison's stuff as well, her feedback and all of the amazing work she did with me, I just, there was some stuff that just was like not sitting right at all. There was that just, this got discarded. Some stuff which I thought sounds amazing, I would live with it, but that didn't work. And there was a lot of stuff which just made sense. I applied, lived with it, and then I kept as well. But her approach is not, she came with, I don't know how they do it, but she comes with, here's what I'm going to bring to it. You tell me, you have the story, you have the language, it's your vision. How can I help you sharpen that vision on the page? She wasn't kind of coming at it as, I'm going to take this and then I'm going to perfect it for you, anything like that. So it never felt like an unequal share of power, if it's kind of comes to that.
We're about to get kind of really kind of philosophical here, but did you find that approach or that, I know you learned a lot about your writing self out of this process, as any good writer will. The editorial process and the development process will teach them a lot about themselves as a writer. Did it change you as a person in terms of how you approach collaboration and that sort of thing?
Well, funny you should say that. So it's sharpened. So my work is in tech, but it's all about people. And we have a very big, in my world, we've got a very big focus on, we need to create products that people love. And feedback, collaboration, authenticity in sharing what we really believe, feeling psychologically safe no matter how senior the person opposite us is, all are things that are reusable in the world of writing when collaborating with classmates, mentors, editors. And I kind of brought that mindset to it to help me through it, so that it doesn't become, God forbid, it became a personal thing about my, and so it was kind of like, this is the work, I'm going to construct the work. It's similar to how I think this is an app, I'm going to construct an app, and I've got amazing ideas about what features need to go in, but ultimately the reader is going to need to understand the story, and I should get some help on that because I'm not going to have all the answers. So it kind of went the other way.
Right. It's nothing like the dreaded group assignment at uni or high school where everybody's meant to contribute the same amount, but in actual fact, one person ends up doing all the work. It's sort of acknowledged from the beginning that you're going to do the bulk of the work and everyone else is sort of supporting you, I suppose, isn't it?
Correct.
So what sort of changes did Alison, were we talking structural changes? Were we talking big picture stuff like, as I said before, changing who's telling the story? Were we talking about shifting the time frame of the story? What sort of big picture stuff was she throwing at you to consider?
Sure. So there was two really major changes. One of them was the number of characters, and she gave me this mind map of or mental model of, she said, the two characters are the chapel, and around them you build out the village, and as you go out further, those characters are less and less important. And we looked at the outermost outskirts of that village coming into the chapel at the center, and really questioned whether we needed all of them. So I ended up culling maybe, I think, like 3 characters and combining their attributes into more important characters in the center. That was a very big change. The other change was, we did this, so at first I wasn't a fan, and then I tried it, and then I was like, oh my God, was that it went character A, B, C, character C, character A, B, C, and it was broken into 3 parts. What is character A part 1, character A character B part 1, and character C part 1, instead of having like scenes from 3 of them mixed in together. That was a major change. I said, I will think about it. Then I printed the whole manuscript and I put them in that order. And actually we did that in workshop with Way, and I read it like that, and I thought, oh yes, now it's so much easier to follow, doesn't jump around. What was I thinking? Second major change that she helped me make.
Did I know that you, at the very beginning, before you kind of started really turning this into something properly crafted, you were talking about how you had this idea in your mind that the reader would learn something, if you like, for want of a better term. So in that sense, you were always mindful of the reader. But at what point did you take that next step that a writer has to take, where the reader's perception of what you were writing and the way they interpret what you're writing becomes as important as anything in the actual story itself? I always call it a contract between yourself and the reader, where you're basically saying to the reader, I'm going to tell you some stuff. I may not be completely trustworthy, but you're going to have to work out for yourself whether I'm a reliable narrator or not. You know, we have to work together. I'm not going to tell you everything. At what point did you kind of come to the realization that was going to have to form part of who you were as a writer?
I think that was definitely part of, again, like, I think that I've got a bit of baggage from tech, because we always, like in my field, we creating, it's kind of like when we create an experience, a digital experience, we're thinking about the user all the time. And so I had to lose a bit of that. Actually, I had to lose a lot of that in Emily's class first. Like, really had to like go, this poem human has ever written. I'm just gonna write like whatever I want, that beautiful experience of it. And then I had to come back at the end when I was sharpening to think about the reader again. And it was really nice to have that. And now what I'm approaching with my new manuscript is, I'm just going to write whatever I want. And one day I find it, and who's going to read it, and then what they're going to think about it. So I don't really know at the beginning of the journey. Now I don't even want to know what it is that I want to tell. But for some reason, the first one, it started off like that.
Got more ideas then, because you know, the concern I think that a lot of people have when they start writing, it's not necessarily memoir, but start writing from an experiential point like you're describing, is they go, okay, I've told the story about my family's journey to this country or whatever it is. What happens next if I run out of stories? Where are you getting more ideas from?
So it's funny, because I always thought, if I can get this thing out of my head, I'll just move on to something different. It'd be so nice. So as soon as I got it out, I don't know. I've got now like I've got about 4 things that are bubbling in the background. I've picked one of them just to pursue. I don't know what will happen to it, or whether it will just be a little piece and it won't turn into a full-on novel. And also poetry, I write that all the time alongside. I'm at the moment doing the poetry course with Fiona Wright. It's absolutely terrifying, because who shows anyone poetry? Oh my God. For some reason, it's way scarier than showing a prose piece or a novel to someone. Way more scary. So doing poetry workshop feedback workshops with her and a group of poets as part of New South Wales Writing, now they're called. But yeah, so I don't know where they come from, but there's a lot of different stories that I want to tell, and it's fun to just get them out now. Yeah.
I think the thing with poetry maybe is that if you write a dud line or a dud word, or use the least best word, if you like, in a novel,
Yes.
Doesn't matter.
Yes.
You use one line can completely scuttle a poem, can't it? It can
Completely, yes.
destroy.
Yes.
But I think, do you find that working on your poetry is helping your prose writing?
It's helping me realize, and this course has helped me learn, that poetry is not something I'm going to ever really write on demand. It's going to be when it wants to come, and I will write it always, and it will always be just for me. That's what I learned. Not because I'm getting really bad feedback, but just because it's just not there for feedback. I feel like, don't care. Like, that's how I like it. Yeah, I think they both help each other. And my voice, my novel voice is a bit poetic anyway, so I feel like there's overlap there.
Now, I didn't mention this in the questions that I sent you, but how would you feel about reading something for us?
I can read you maybe the first chapter.
Yeah, that'd be
like
great.
the first
Are you happy
scene,
to do
not
that?
too much of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have read this before, so I have. I'm not as fearful as my first time I had to try that.
What do you think that? Where do you think that fear comes from that we have about reading our work? I mean, it doesn't matter how many times you're told this is beautiful, this is great, this is. Why do you think we still get fearful about sharing it?
I think it's because we have. It's very similar to the creative. Something is there is like if I drew, I would or wrote or made a very bad clay pot for you, I would have the same feeling. I wonder if it's got to do with the fact that in creating something, we are ultimately exposing ourselves or a part of ourselves. And no matter how detached and disciplined we are about the work and how it's now out there and all of that, I guess a part of me at least will always feel like I had a hand in its birth in some way. Like I created this, I crafted it, I made decisions about it. I hope it's good. I hope you like it. It's the same as if I made a dish for you and I'd be like, so does it taste okay? Maybe that's what it is.
Do you think the people who work on the next edition of Windows Vista, for example, whether they have anxiety the day it comes out? And if not, why didn't they? Because they should have, right?
Yes. Hey, I ship features and I get anxious thinking, I hope users like it.
We feel very honoured that you're going to read the first scene from Pomegranate and Fig by Zoe Ghani.
So the first chapter is called Henna, 1970. It starts with a poem by Rumi, and here we go. If anyone asks thee, which is the pleasantest of cities, thou mayst answer him aright that it is Herat, for the world is the sea, and the province of Khorasan like a pearl oyster therein, the city of Herat being as the pearl in the middle of the oyster. Rumi, 1207 to 1273. The youngest daughter of Ustad and Bobo is so delicate that the 120-day winds of Herat will blow her away. Her bones are made from porcelain, rigid and fine. A diaphanous girl in cotton dress and pantaloons, she's lifted up high above Herat to the height of the ancient minarets of Queen Gauharshad and carried to a far corner of the world. As she floats, her hair twists and wraps itself around her white face, enfolding the arch of her long, slim nose and the glass lids of her large, closed eyes. Family and friends tell her lovingly that she's too sickly, too thin. She's not beautiful by the standards of the time, where curves and flesh are preferred. Her rose-cheeked, curvaceous sisters, 4 of them, are considered beauties by all. Their buxom bodies bounce to school, at play and at picnics, but they become jealous because their beauty doesn't seem to be enough, because she receives so much more attention. They work the chores around the large house, they study through the night for exams. Henna studies alongside them. She stays awake all night to feed her brain, to replace her lack of beauty with an abundance of knowledge. She has to study even harder, given her mind seems never to settle long enough on one idea, doesn't retain the biology, the math, the chemistry. It retains the poetry and prose, but even that for a short while. Every good grade she gets is the result of twice as much study as her sisters. This morning, she's wrapped in layers of woolens, proud and blue with cold. Her thin waist threatens to break as she lifts her heavy school bag onto her shoulder. Like most days, her elder sister will carry it for her through the 45-minute walk to school. This evening, her study of several days and nights dissolves into a fever that lasts a fortnight. She takes medicine to alleviate the fever, but it cannot settle her anxious mind. She wishes her life would be uprooted and scattered by the rush of the 120-day winds. She doesn't know how real this wish will later become, this uprooting brought not by nature's fury, but by the ferocity of war.
Thank you, that's beautiful. How different is that from what you first started with?
Oh my goodness.
It's so long that
very
you've
different.
forgotten.
It was actually, I had a narrator that was a child who was going to tell the story. So it was my mother.
Right. Which brings a whole bunch of different kind of challenges, how you deal with the unreliable narrator and all those sorts of things. Yeah. So where are we up to now then? You're just waiting to hear back from a particular publisher, and then if and when they come back with a positive, that's all good. And if they don't, then it's onward and upward, I suppose. Look for someone else to publish it.
Yeah. It's my fingers are crossed. That's all I can do now.
That's all you can do. So how long since you've heard?
We had a chat about a month ago, just as an update. And yeah, that's when they shared the kind of COVID challenge. And I empathize because we're seeing that in my work life as well. Things are not easy, you're not progressing anything in the way that you were before. And world has changed. We're strange times.
We're saving time in our commute, but everything's taking longer once we get working, isn't it?
Yes.
Zoe Ghani, thank you so much for talking to us today. We wish you all the best with your ongoing writing career, and we really do look forward to seeing Pomegranate and Fig in print sometime very soon. You will let us know, won't you?
Of course, I will be letting everyone who's ever had a conversation about it with me.
So much so it'll be like, oh God, here comes Zoe Ghani, look out, she's going to tell you about it. Yes. I know people like that, and if they're listening now, they know who they are as well. Well, thank you so much for chatting with us, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you, James.